Imagine lying in a sterile hospital bed, the rhythmic, mechanical chirp of the heart monitor, the only proof you are still alive. Your body is a map of pain, your breath a shallow labor. And yet, the most agonizing thing in the room isn't the failure of your heart. It's the look of pure, clinical disgust on your husband's face as he checks his Rolex. Lily Miller looked up through a haze of medication to see Scott, the man she had built a life for, standing at the foot of her bed. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't offer a prayer. Instead, he adjusted his silk tie, tossed a thick envelope onto her fragile legs, and whispered the words that would shatter her soul. "You've become a bad investment, Lily, and I don't keep assets that don't yield a return." The fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit at St. Jude's Medical Center hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz. To Lily, that sound had become the soundtrack of her existence for the last 3 weeks. At 32, Lily should have been in the prime of her life. Instead, she looked like a ghost of the woman she once was. Her vibrant auburn hair was matted against the pillow, and her skin, once glowing, was now translucent, highlighting the dark, bruised circles under her eyes. She had been admitted after a total systemic collapse, a severe autoimmune flare-up complicated by a cardiac event. It was serious, the doctors said, but treatable. It was expensive, but manageable. Or so she had thought. Standing at the foot of her bed wasn't a comforting partner. It was Scott Miller, her husband of 7 years. He wore a charcoal grey tailored suit that cost more than Lily's monthly medical deductible. He smelled of expensive sandalwood cologne and success, and he was tapping his foot with the impatience of a man late for a flight. "Scott," Lily whispered, her voice raspy from the ventilator she had finally been weaned off of the day before. "Water, please." Scott didn't move toward the pitcher on the nightstand. Instead, he let out a long, exaggerated sigh, an exhalation of air that signaled immense inconvenience. "Lily, we need to talk, and I have a hard out in 10 minutes. I have a dinner reservation at Prime and provisions at 8. Lily blinked, her mind struggling to keep up through the fog. A reservation? With who? Scott finally looked at her. His eyes, once the warm hazel she had fallen in love with in college, were now as cold and flat as a winter lake. "Sarah, we're celebrating." The name hit Lily like a physical blow. Sarah was her maid of honor, her college roommate, her person. Celebrating what? Lily's heart monitor picked up speed. Beep, 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 beep. "My promotion to senior partner," Scott said, smoothing his lapel, "and my freedom." The air seemed to vanish from the room. Lily tried to sit up, but her muscles had atrophied from weeks of bed rest. Her hand moved instinctively to the thin gold band on her ring finger, the symbolic object of a promise she had kept, even when Scott was a struggling MBA student with nothing but debt. "What are you saying?" Scott reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a get-well card or a photo of their dog. He pulled out a thick, folded document and tossed it onto the thin hospital blanket covering her legs. It landed with a heavy, final thud. "Divorce papers," Scott stated flatly. "I've already signed. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, says that given your chronic condition and your sudden inability to contribute to the household, you are essentially a liability. I am not going to drain my personal accounts keeping a sinking ship afloat, Lily. It's simple ROI. ROI? Lily choked out, tears finally spilling over and burning her cheeks. "I'm your wife, Scott. I worked 2 jobs so you could finish school. I paid off your student loans. I sacrificed my own career, my own family, for you. And this is the return?" Scott sneered, stepping closer until he was hovering over her. His voice dropped to a cruel, intimate whisper. "Look at you, Lily. You're broken. You're a sinkhole. Sarah, she's vibrant. She's healthy. She's a partner who can actually stand by my side at a gala, not someone I have to wheel around like a piece of faulty luggage. I cancelled your private insurance at 5 p.m. today. It lapses at midnight. You're on state aid now. Good luck with the basic care." He turned on his heel, the squeak of his expensive leather shoes echoing on the linoleum. "Scott!" she screamed, the sound tearing at her raw throat. "You can't just leave me here. I have no one. I gave up everyone for you." Scott paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He didn't look back. "You should have thought about that before you got sick. Life is for the winners, Lily. Goodbye." The heavy door clicked shut. Lily lay there, the silence rushing back in, heavier and colder than before. The man she had chosen over her own flesh and blood a decade ago, the man she had defended against her older brother's warnings, had just discarded her like a piece of trash. As the clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, Lily looked at the thin gold band on her finger. It felt like a shackle. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she was completely, utterly alone, and her heart was quite literally failing her. She closed her eyes, praying for the darkness to take her, unaware that 2 floors down, a private helicopter was touching down on the roof. The transition happened at exactly 12:01 a.m. It wasn't just a change in status, it was a change in the very air Lily breathed. 2 orderlies, their faces tired and devoid of the practiced empathy they'd shown just hours before, arrived with a standard-issue transport gurney. Without a word, they began unhooking the high-end monitoring equipment that Scott's premium insurance had provided. "Wait," Lily croaked, her hand reaching out weakly as they prepared to move her. My chart says I need continuous telemetry." "The state aid ward has a central station, Mrs. Miller," one of the men said, not meeting her eyes. "You'll be checked every 4 hours, standard protocol." They wheeled her out of the private suite with its panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and down into the bowels of the hospital. The new room was small, cramped, and shared with 3 other patients. The smell of fresh lilies was replaced by the stinging scent of industrial-grade floor wax and the low, constant moan of a woman behind a thin plastic curtain. Lily lay there, staring at the peeling grey paint on the ceiling. Every breath felt like drawing air through a wet sponge. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the crushing weight of her own memory. The mistake she had buried for a decade. 10 years ago, her older brother, Ethan, had stood in their parents' kitchen and begged her not to marry Scott. "He's a ghost, Lily," Ethan had warned, his eyes fierce with protective rage. "He doesn't love you. He loves what you can do for him. He's a hollow man, looking for a pedestal, and you're going to break yourself trying to hold him up." Lily had been 22, blinded by Scott's practiced charm and the way he looked at her like she was the only girl in the world. She had screamed at Ethan, called him controlling and jealous, and told him she never wanted to see him again if he couldn't support her soulmate. When their parents died in a car accident 2 years later, Lily hadn't even called Ethan. She had let Scott handle the estate, let Scott sell their parents' home to invest in his MBA, and let Scott slowly prune every branch of her family tree until she was a sapling standing alone in his shadow. She had chosen a predator over her own flesh and blood, and now she was paying the interest on that debt. "Mrs. Miller?" A sharp, officious voice snapped Lily back to the present. Standing at the foot of her bed was Mrs. Gable, the hospital's financial administrator. She held a tablet like a weapon. "It's just Lily now," she whispered. "Right. Lily." Mrs. Gable didn't look sympathetic. She looked like someone counting pennies. "We have a problem. Your specialized cardiac reconstruction surgery was scheduled for tomorrow. However, under your current state aid coverage, that procedure is classified as quality of life improvement rather than life-saving emergency. The state won't authorize the $150,000 cost." Lily felt her heart skip, not from the disease, but from pure terror. But without it, the doctors said my heart will eventually just stop. "According to Code 44B, you aren't in active failure this second," Gable recited, her voice as mechanical as the monitors. "Unless you can provide a deposit of $50,000 by 10 a.m. tomorrow, we have no choice but to discharge you to a long-term hospice facility in rural Illinois." "Hospice?" Lily's voice broke. That's a place where people go to die." "It's a place for comfortable transition," Gable corrected. "You have 12 hours. As the administrator marched out, a sudden commotion erupted in the hallway. It wasn't the usual frantic pace of a code blue. It was something different, a hushed, reverent energy. The sound of dozens of footsteps trying to keep pace with one person. "He's actually here," a nurse whispered loudly just outside Lily's curtain. "The board of directors flew him in from Zurich on a private jet. They say he bought a 40% stake in the hospital group this morning." "Dr. Blackwood?" Another gasped. "The guy who pioneered the synthetic valve? I thought he only treated royalty." "Apparently, he's the new chief of medicine. He's doing rounds on the difficult cases first. Some kind of PR stunt to show he cares about the community." Lily closed her eyes, a single tear tracking into her ear. She didn't care about billionaire doctors or hospital politics. She just wanted the pain to end. She was so tired of fighting for a life that no one else seemed to value. Suddenly, the curtain to her cramped space was ripped back. The harsh hallway light flooded in, silhouetting a tall, broad-shouldered figure. He was flanked by a dozen nervous-looking residents and a terrified Mrs. Gable. "This is the patient, Dr. Blackwood," Gable stammered, her voice trembling. "End-stage arterial weakness. But as I explained, she lacks the funding for the—" "Quiet," the man said. His voice was a deep, commanding rumble that seemed to vibrate in Lily's very bones. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 10 years, yet she knew it better than her own. Lily squinted against the light, turning her head slowly. The man stepped into the room. He was imposing in a bespoke charcoal suit under a pristine white coat. He didn't look at the chart Gable was frantically holding out. He looked straight at Lily. He had steel-grey eyes, a sharp jawline, and a small, jagged scar just above his left eyebrow, a scar Lily remembered from a bicycle accident when he was 12 and she was 9. The room stopped spinning. The air seemed to crystallize. "Ethan," Lily breathed, her voice so small it was barely a ghost. The residents gasped. No one called the god of surgery by his first name. But Ethan Blackwood didn't flinch. He walked slowly to the side of her bed, ignoring the stench of cheap disinfectant and the crowded room. He looked down at his little sister, and for a fleeting second, the terrifying stoic mask of the billionaire doctor cracked. "Leave us," Ethan commanded. "But doctor, protocol dictates—" Gable started. Ethan turned his head just an inch, his gaze freezing the administrator in place. "I bought the protocol when I bought the building, Mrs. Gable. Get out, all of you." They scrambled out like frightened mice, pulling the curtain shut. Ethan Blackwood stood over her, his presence filling the tiny, miserable space until it felt like a palace. "Hello, Lily," he said softly. You're Dr. Blackwood," Lily stammered, her mind struggling to connect the angry boy she'd hurt with this titan of industry. "But our name, it was Miller." "I took our mother's maiden name," Ethan said, pulling up a chair. He took her hand, the one with the thin gold band, and his thumb brushed over the metal with a touch that was both gentle and terrifyingly cold. I didn't want anything to do with the life you chose, until I heard what that life was doing to you. His eyes dropped to the divorce papers still sitting on her bed. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. "Where is he, Lily?" Ethan's voice dropped an octave. "Where is the man you told me was worth more than blood?" Lily couldn't look at him. She turned her face toward the peeling wallpaper, the shame burning hotter than the fever in her blood. For 10 years, she had held Scott up as the trophy of her independence, the proof that she didn't need the stifling protection of the Blackwood name. To admit his betrayal now felt like dying twice. "He left, Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "2 days ago. He's with Sarah. He said I was a bad investment, that he couldn't afford to keep a sinking ship afloat." The silence that followed was so profound it felt heavy. Lily heard the sound of Ethan's free hand curling into a fist, the leather of his chair creaking under the sudden, violent pressure. "A bad investment," Ethan repeated. His voice was calm, terrifyingly so. It was the calm of a predator that had already scented the kill. "He used our parents' legacy to fund his degree, used your labor to build his career, and now that the asset requires maintenance, he discards it." Ethan stood up abruptly. He walked to the small, grimy window that looked out over a brick alleyway and pulled out a sleek, black smartphone. "Gavin," Ethan said into the phone, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I need the legal team on a conference line in 5 minutes. I want a full forensic audit on a man named Scott Miller. I want his bank accounts, his credit score, his employment contract, and the GPS coordinates of his car on my desk within the hour. And Gavin, call the board. Tell them I'm activating the presidential suite, now." He turned back to Lily. The coldness was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective light. He reached down and gently unpried her fingers from the thin gold wedding band she had been twisting. "You aren't staying here another minute," he said. "Ethan, I can't pay for the surgery," Lily sobbed, the reality of her poverty crashing down. "Mrs. Gable said, Mrs. Gable is about to find out that her employment is an elective expense," Ethan interrupted, a dark, sharp smile touching his lips. "You aren't paying a dime, Lily. You're a Blackwood. And in this city, that means the world bows to you." The next hour was a blur of high-speed efficiency. A team of elite nurses, dressed in charcoal scrubs that signaled they belonged to the private Blackwood wing, arrived with a specialized cardiac transport unit. They didn't just move Lily, they transitioned her into a different universe. She was whisked through a private elevator bank to the top floor of the hospital. When the doors opened, the smell of bleach was replaced by the scent of fresh white tea and expensive linen. The presidential suite wasn't a hospital room. It was a sanctuary. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the shimmering expanse of Lake Michigan. There were original oil paintings on the walls, a silk-upholstered sofa for guests, and a bed with Egyptian cotton sheets that felt like a cloud against her bruised skin. As the nurses hooked her up to silent, state-of-the-art monitors, Ethan stood at the foot of the bed, reading a tablet that was already humming with data. "Scott has been busy," Ethan said, his voice tight. "He didn't just cancel your insurance, Lily. He's already filed a hardship claim to seize the remaining equity in the condo you both own. He's currently at a jewelry store in the Gold Coast. He's trading in your grandmother's diamond watch for a pre-engagement ring for Sarah." Lily felt a fresh wave of nausea. "That watch? He told me it was lost in the move 2 years ago." "He's been planning his exit for a long time," Ethan said, walking to her side. He took a surgical marker from his pocket. But he forgot one thing. He forgot that you have a brother who spent 10 years learning how to fix broken hearts and how to break the people who cause them. He leaned down, his forehead touching hers for a brief, tender second. I'm going to perform the reconstruction myself tomorrow morning, Lily. You're going to wake up stronger than you've ever been. And when you do, we aren't just going to sue him. We're going to dismantle his entire existence. Lily looked at the surgical marker in his hand, then at the panoramic view of the city where Scott was currently celebrating her death. For the first time in weeks, the crushing weight in her chest eased. It wasn't just the oxygen. It was the realization that the sinking ship had just found its captain. "Sleep, Lil," Ethan whispered, dimming the lights. The bad investment is about to demand a very high interest rate. As Lily drifted into a medicated sleep, she saw Ethan standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights, a man holding the power of a god and the heart of a vengeful brother. 6 hours later, while Lily slept, Ethan sat in the Mahogany Row boardroom downstairs. On the screen was a photo of Scott Miller laughing at a bar, a champagne flute in one hand and Sarah's waist in the other. Ethan tapped a button on his desk, and a man in a sharp suit appeared on the screen. "Mr. Thorne," Ethan said, "is everything in place for the Apex Logistics acquisition?" "The papers are ready for your signature, Dr. Blackwood," Gavin Thorne replied. "We've confirmed Scott Miller is expecting a massive quarterly bonus from them next week. He's already leveraged that bonus to put a down payment on a new penthouse." "Perfect," Ethan said, his grey eyes flashing like steel. "Buy the company, buy the debt, and on Monday morning, I want Scott Miller to walk into his office and find out that his new boss is the woman he left to die." The surgery took 14 hours. It was a marathon of medical precision that made quiet headlines in the prestigious journals Ethan contributed to, though the patient's name was kept strictly anonymous. For Lily, those hours didn't exist in time. They were a velvet void where the rhythmic thumping of a machine took over for the heart that had given up on her. When she finally floated back to consciousness, she didn't wake to the sound of beeping alarms or the sharp, biting scent of antiseptic. She woke to the smell of fresh, white lilies. The real ones, not the synthetic sprays of the lower wards, and the feeling of Egyptian cotton against her skin. She blinked her eyes open. The room was bathed in the soft, golden amber of a Chicago sunset. Ethan was sitting in a leather armchair near the window, a tablet in his hand and a stethoscope draped around his neck. He looked exhausted, the dark circles under his eyes a testament to the night he had spent mending her valves and veins. Am I dead?" Lily croaked, her voice barely a whisper. "Not on my watch," Ethan rumbled, his voice thick with a relief he tried to hide. He stood up and poured her a glass of water from a crystal carafe, supporting her head with a gentleness that brought tears to her eyes. "I told you, Lil. I don't do things by halves. Your heart is stronger now than it was when you were 20. Over the next 3 weeks, Lily's recovery was nothing short of a transformation. Under the care of world-class physical therapists and a private chef Ethan had hired to rebuild her immune system, the ghost of the woman she had been began to vanish. Her auburn hair regained its vibrant shine. The hollow, bruised look in her cheeks filled out with healthy color. But while her body healed, her mind was a battlefield. One afternoon, while Ethan was checking her vitals, Lily looked at the thin, pale band of skin on her ring finger, where her wedding ring used to be. The gold band was gone. Ethan had dropped it into a biohazard bin the night of her arrival, but the memory of the weight remained. "Ethan," she asked softly, "how did you become all of this? We grew up in that tiny house in Ohio. You were just my brother who liked fixing broken radios." Ethan paused, his gaze scanning her vitals. "I was angry, Lily. When you chose Scott, when you told me I was dead to you for seeing him for what he was, I took that rage and channeled it. I went to Europe on a scholarship I didn't tell you about. I developed a synthetic valve for pediatric hearts and patented it. I invested in biotech. 1 million turned into 10. 10 into 100. Now," he gestured to the skyline, "now I can buy and sell Scott Miller's entire existence before lunch." He walked to the mahogany desk and picked up a thick, leather-bound dossier. He tossed it onto her bed. "Speaking of Scott, this is what your soulmate has been doing while you were in the OR." Lily opened the folder, her breath caught. There were photos, grainy but clear, of Scott and Sarah on a yacht in Miami, taken just 4 days ago. Scott was laughing, holding a bottle of Cristal. Sarah was wearing a diamond bracelet. "My grandmother's bracelet," Lily whispered, her hand trembling. "He told me he sold it to pay for my first hospital bill." "He pawned it to put a down payment on a Ferrari," Ethan corrected, his voice hardening. "He's currently telling everyone at Apex Logistics that his wife passed away in a state facility, and he's processing his grief on a sabbatical. He's already started the paperwork to claim your life insurance policy, Lily. He's betting on your death to fund his new life with Sarah." A hot, unfamiliar spark ignited in Lily's chest. It wasn't the sorrow she had felt in the ICU. It was a cold, sharp clarity. It was the hidden heiress finally realizing she was standing on a mountain of gold while a beggar tried to spit on her. "He thinks I'm a non-factor," Lily said, her voice steadier than it had been in years. "He thinks you're a memory," Ethan said, a wolfish glint in his grey eyes. "He doesn't know that Lily Miller died in that ICU. But Lily Blackwood? She's about to make her debut." He handed her a sleek, black smartphone and a set of keys to a private residence in the Gold Coast. "Step 1, Ethan said. "You disappear officially. As far as the public record is concerned, you are in a coma in a rural hospice. But in 3 months, there is a gala, the Helios Charity Gala. It's the most exclusive event in Chicago. Scott has been desperate for an invite for years to secure a $10 million contract for Apex." Ethan leaned down, a dark, conspiratorial smile on his face. "I've already bought the company, Lily. I'm the chairman. And you? You're going to be the new CEO. We're going to give Scott exactly what he wants, an audience with the board. And then we're going to show him exactly what happens when you bet against a Blackwood." Lily closed the dossier. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. She didn't see a patient. She saw a woman who had been forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the love of the only man who had never lied to her. "I don't want to just survive, Ethan," Lily said, her eyes flashing with a regal, terrifying intensity. "I want him to watch everything he loves turn to ash, just like he did to me." "Good," Ethan replied, handing her a glass of champagne, "because the return on investment is about to become a total loss." Lily took a sip, the bubbles sharp and cold. She looked out at the city, no longer a victim of its shadows, but the master of its heights. The sinking ship wasn't just afloat, it had become a warship. 3 months later. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House was a sea of black ties, silk gowns, and the heavy, cloying scent of old money. Scott Miller adjusted his tuxedo in the gilded mirror of the foyer, his chest puffed out with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Sarah stood beside him, in a dress that was a little too tight, a little too loud, her eyes darting around the room at the diamonds being worn by women she desperately wanted to be. "Tonight is the night, babe," Scott whispered, checking his Rolex, the one he'd bought with Lily's death settlement money. "I close the Helios deal, and we move into the penthouse by Monday. No more hiding. No more grief. Just us." He didn't notice the hush that began to fall over the room. He didn't see the way the elite of Chicago, senators, moguls, and socialites, suddenly parted like the Red Sea. "Ladies and gentlemen," a booming voice announced from the stage, "please welcome our host, Dr. Ethan Blackwood, and the new CEO of the Helios Foundation." Scott turned, a practiced, sycophant smile plastered on his face, ready to shake the hand of the man who held his future. But the smile froze. Then it shattered. Walking down the grand staircase, her hand resting on the arm of the most powerful doctor in the world, was a woman in an emerald silk gown that matched the fire in her auburn hair. Around her neck was a collar of diamonds that cost more than Scott's entire net worth. She looked radiant. She looked healthy. She looked like a queen coming to reclaim a stolen throne. Scott's glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. "Lily," he mouthed, his face draining of every drop of color. Lily Blackwood didn't look away. She locked eyes with him across the room, a cold, dazzling smile playing on her lips, the smile of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. The silence in the grand ballroom was crystalline, broken only by the soft, frantic clicking of Scott's pulse against the crystal shard in his hand. He didn't feel the champagne soaking into his rented shoes. He only felt the weight of Lily's gaze, a gaze that no longer held the warmth of a wife, but the cold, clinical distance of a judge. Beside him, Sarah's hand tightened on his arm, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "Scott," she hissed, her voice trembling. You said she was in a state facility. You said she was dying." Scott didn't answer. His brain was a frantic machine, trying to find a gear that wasn't stripped. The narcissist's survival instinct, the one that had allowed him to sleep soundly while Lily gasped for air in an ICU, began to claw its way back. She's alive. She's a Blackwood. She's rich. In an instant, his betrayal was rewritten in his mind as a temporary lapse, born of grief. "Lily," he mouthed again, finding his voice. He took a step forward, a grotesque, practiced smile twitching on his lips. "Lily, my God, it's a miracle. I've been so lost. The doctors, they told me there was no hope. I was out of my mind with sorrow." The crowd parted as Lily descended the final steps. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, the emerald silk of her gown whispering against the marble. Ethan walked a half step behind her, his presence an impenetrable wall of charcoal wool and steel-grey intent. Lily stopped exactly 3 feet from Scott. Up close, she smelled of expensive jasmine and success, a stark contrast to the cheap disinfectant and despair of their last meeting. "Sorrow, Scott." Lily's voice was strong, resonant, and carried easily through the hushed room. "Is that what you call it? Because the surveillance footage from the Miami marina suggests you were processing that sorrow with vintage crystal and my grandmother's jewelry." A ripple of low-frequency murmurs swept through the socialites. In Chicago, scandal was the only currency more valuable than cash. That was a mistake, a moment of weakness," Scott stammered, his eyes darting to the powerful men watching from the balconies. He reached out, his hand trembling, trying to grasp her arm. "Lily, please, let's go somewhere private. We're still married. We're a team." Ethan's hand clamped onto Scott's wrist before he could touch her. The pressure was surgical, precise, and clearly agonizing. "I'd keep your hands to yourself, Mr. Miller," Ethan rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "Unless you'd like to experience the quality of life improvement you denied my sister." Lily didn't even flinch. She looked at Sarah, whose face had drained of colour. The mistress was wearing a necklace that Lily recognized, a delicate sapphire pendant Scott had claimed was stolen by a housekeeper 3 years ago. "Hello, Sarah," Lily said, her tone almost conversational. "I see you've been busy playing house with my things. I hope you enjoyed the yacht. It's the last time you'll ever be on one that isn't a stock photo for a travel agency." "Lily, listen to me," Scott pleaded, his charm failing him in real time. "I know I messed up, but I'm here for the Helios deal. I'm here to build our future. Gavin Thorne said—" "Gavin Thorne works for me." "Scott," Lily interrupted. She stepped closer, her eyes locking onto the Rolex on his wrist. "And so do you. Or rather, you did." Scott's breath hitched. "What are you talking about?" "I bought Apex Logistics yesterday morning, Scott," Ethan stated, leaning in. "A total acquisition. Every debt, every contract, every asset. Which means my sister isn't just a guest tonight. She is your employer. She is the chairman of the board. And your performance review? It's going to be a matter of public record." The room seemed to tilt for Scott. The $10 million deal he had pinned his life on wasn't a lifeline. It was the anchor that was going to drag him to the bottom. "You can't do this!" Sarah shrieked, her desperation breaking through. "He's a senior partner. You can't just take his career." "I'm not taking it, Sarah," Lily said, turning her back on them both. "I'm simply auditing it. Integrity is a requirement for the Helios Foundation. And Scott, your accounts are surprisingly creative." Lily looked over her shoulder one last time, a cold, dazzling smile playing on her lips. "Enjoy the appetizers, Scott. They're the most expensive things you'll be eating for a very long time. We have a meeting in the Apex boardroom, Monday morning at 9. Don't be late. I'm quite strict about ROI these days." She walked away, the crowd closing behind her like the gates of a kingdom he had been exiled from. Scott stood in the center of the floor, a rented tuxedo, a stolen watch, and a puddle of spilled champagne. He looked at the faces around him, the moguls and mentors he had spent years trying to impress. They weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him with the same disgust he had shown Lily in the hospital. "Scott, do something!" Sarah hissed, tugging at his arm. Scott didn't move. He looked down at his Rolex. The second hand was ticking, each beat a reminder that the world he had built on her bones was beginning to crumble. "She still loves me," Scott whispered, his narcissism flaring in a final, frantic spark. "She's just playing a game. She's hurt. If I can just get her alone, I can fix this. I'm Brad Miller. I can sell anything." He had no idea that Monday morning wasn't a meeting. It was an execution. Monday morning arrived draped in a suffocating gray fog that rolled off Lake Michigan, swallowing the peaks of the Chicago skyscrapers. Inside the climate-controlled lobby of the Apex Logistics Tower, Scott Miller felt nothing but the warm, golden glow of impending victory. He had spent the weekend scrubbing his brain of the humiliation at the gala, replacing it with a new, deluded narrative. "She didn't report me. She invited me to a meeting. She wants to see me crawl and then she'll take me back." He breezed through the revolving doors, checking his reflection in the glass. His suit was pressed to military precision, his hair coiffed, his smile practiced. In his left hand, he carried a bouquet of 24 long-stemmed Baccara roses, deep red, velvety, and obscenely expensive. They were a calculated investment, a prop for the scene he had rehearsed 1,000 times. "Good morning, Brenda," he beamed at the receptionist, flashing his teeth. "Is the new ownership team settled in upstairs?" Brenda, A woman who usually greeted him with a warm smile didn't look up. Her eyes were glued to her monitor, her posture stiff. "They are waiting for you in the main boardroom, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice tight. "Go straight up." "Excellent," Scott winked, oblivious to the chill. As the elevator ascended to the penthouse floor, Scott adjusted his tie. He had done his homework. Under Illinois law, if the divorce wasn't finalized, he could still claim a stake in the Blackwood assets. He would frame his affair with Sarah as a temporary lapse caused by the stress of Lily's illness. He could sell anything. He was Scott Miller. The elevator dinged, the doors slid open. The hallway to the executive suite had changed. The old, dusty paintings of maritime ships were gone, replaced by stark, modern art. The nameplate on the double-glass doors no longer said CEO. It read, Office of the Chairman. Scott pushed the doors open, the roses held out like a peace offering. "Lily, I just wanted to—" The words died in his throat. The massive boardroom looked less like an office and more like a tribunal. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in a severe, artificial light. At the head of the 20-foot mahogany table sat Lily. She wore a navy blue suit, tailored to an edge, her hair pulled back in an elegant, severe bun. To her right sat Ethan, slouching slightly, tapping a heavy silver pen against the table. To her left was Gavin Thorne, flanked by 3 men in identical grey suits who radiated the predatory energy of high-priced corporate litigation. But it was the person sitting in the corner that made Scott's stomach drop. Sarah was there, huddled in a folding chair, her makeup smeared, her designer dress replaced by a cheap tracksuit. She wouldn't look at him. "Sit down, Scott," Lily said. Her voice wasn't loud. It carried the absolute weight of a gavel. Scott hesitated, then placed the roses on the far end of the table. They looked ridiculous, a splash of desperate romance against a wall of legal hostility. He pulled out a chair, trying to regain his footing. "This is quite a committee for a Monday morning. Lily, look, before we get into the business side, I think we need to clear the air personally. We have history. 5 years. You can't just throw that away because—" "Forgive the interruption," Ethan snorted, his grey eyes flashing. "But history isn't the asset we're auditing today." "Lily, do you know what a forensic audit is?" Gavin Thorne asked, sliding a thick bound document across the table. It stopped inches from Scott's hand. The cover read, Independent Financial Investigation, Bradley Scott Miller. "We're talking about systematic embezzlement," Gavin continued, his voice dry and factual. "Wire fraud, money laundering, and grand larceny." Scott's heart skipped a beat. That's a misunderstanding. Expense reports are part of the compensation package. We aren't talking about steak dinners, Scott," Lily interrupted, her eyes boring into his. "You created 3 shell vendors over the last 24 months. B.H.M. Logistics, Miller Supply, and J&B Consulting. You approved invoices for services that were never rendered. Warehouse rentals that don't exist. Consulting fees for a company registered to your mother's basement in Ohio." Scott's hands began to shake. "Those are legitimate contractors." "We checked the IP logs, Scott," Ethan said, leaning forward. "The transfers were made from your home computer. And BHM Logistics, the bank account is joint-owned by you and Sarah." Scott whipped his head toward Sarah. You talked?" Sarah burst into tears, her voice a shrill, terrified wail. "They have everything, Scott. They told me if I signed an affidavit detailing your schemes, I'd get immunity. I'm too pretty for jail, Scott. I'm not going to prison for you." The room spun. The VP lifestyle, the condo, the yacht. It had all been built on a house of cards, and Lily had just pulled the bottom one out. "You've siphoned off nearly $450,000 from Apex," Lily said, her voice turning icy. "And since my holding firm acquired Apex entirely, you didn't just steal from a corporation, you stole from me." Scott stood up, knocking his chair over with a crash. Panic, cold and primal, clawed at his throat. "You can't do this! I'm your husband! Spousal privilege—" "Spousal privilege doesn't apply when the crime is committed against the spouse," the lead lawyer said, looking bored. "And we don't need her testimony. We have the wire transfers." "Lily, please," Scott begged, his charm replaced by raw desperation. He slid to his knees, reaching for the edge of her desk. "I'm sick. I have a spending problem. I'll pay it back. I'll sell the condo. Just don't send me to federal prison." Lily stood up slowly. She walked around the table, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. She stopped right in front of him, looking down at the man who had left her to die. "With what money, Scott?" she asked softly. "I froze your assets at 9 a.m. The condo is being seized. Your car has been repossessed from the garage downstairs. Your credit cards have been terminated. You have nothing." "Then just let me go," Scott sobbed, grabbing the hem of her jacket. "I'll sign anything. I won't ask for a settlement. Just let me walk away." Lily stepped back, looking at his hand with disgust. "You already signed the papers, Scott. Remember? You threw them on my legs in the ICU. You said I was a bad ROI. Well, my legal team filed an emergency motion this morning. The judge granted an expedited decree based on criminal misconduct. We have been divorced for exactly 52 minutes. Scott's knees finally gave way. He collapsed in a heap of expensive wool and despair. "But I have one last gift for you," Lily said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled yellow receipt. She dropped it. It fluttered down and landed on his chest. It was the receipt for the coffee and bagel he had bought in the hospital cafeteria the day he walked out on her. "You talked so much about ROI, Scott," Lily whispered, her voice trembling with a decade of suppressed rage. "You invested in cruelty. You invested in greed. You bet against me. And now you're collecting your returns." The service doors at the back of the room opened. 2 police officers and a federal agent walked in. "Bradley Scott Miller," the agent barked. "You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion." As the officers hauled Scott to his feet and the metal cuffs clicked shut on his wrists, he screamed for Lily, his voice echoing through the penthouse. But Lily didn't flinch. She picked up the bouquet of 24 red roses, inhaled their scent one last time, and then dropped them, face down, into the metal trash can in the corner. "Get him out of my building," she said, turning her back on him to look out at the grey Chicago sky. As the doors closed on his screaming, Lily took a breath. A real, deep, healthy breath. For the first time in 10 years, she was finally free. 1 year later, the Chicago winter was as unforgiving as ever. The wind howled off the frozen surface of Lake Michigan, rattling the windows of the skyscrapers and burying the streets in drifts of dirty grey slush. But inside the newly inaugurated Lily Blackwood Heart Center, the atmosphere was one of perpetual spring. The new wing of St. Jude's was a marvel of modern architecture, a cathedral of glass, light, and living greenery, designed to heal not just the body, but the spirit. It was the exact opposite of the sterile, noisy, cramped room where Lily had once lain, waiting to die. Lily walked through the atrium, the heels of her boots clicking rhythmically on the polished terrazzo floor. She wasn't just a donor whose name was etched on a brass plaque by the door. She was the executive director. She was there every day, ensuring that the cruelty she had experienced was never repeated within these walls. She paused at the intake desk, where a young woman was arguing tearfully with a billing specialist. Lily recognized the look of panic in the woman's eyes, the raw terror of realizing that your life has a price tag you cannot afford. "Marie," Lily said softly, stepping up to the desk. "What's the issue here?" "Ms. Blackwood," the receptionist straightened up. "Mrs. Rodriguez's insurance has a gap. They won't cover the pre-op screening for her daughter's valve replacement." Lily looked at the mother, then at the little girl hiding behind her leg. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, silver stethoscope, her own symbolic object of authority and healing. "Code it under the Blackwood grant," Lily said, signing the clipboard without hesitation. "Full coverage, and get them a private room on the 4th floor." As the mother dissolved into tears of gratitude, Lily offered a gentle smile and continued toward the elevators. This was her therapy. Every life she saved was a brick in the wall she was building against her past. She took the private elevator to the roof garden. It was her sanctuary, a place where she could breathe. The terrace was heated, keeping the snow at bay, and offered a panoramic view of the city she now helped lead. She walked to the railing, wrapping her cashmere coat tighter against the chill. "I had a feeling I'd find you up here." Ethan's voice came from the doorway. He walked out, holding 2 steaming cups of coffee. He looked different now, too, less like the angry, vengeful protector, and more like a man who had finally found peace. He handed her a cup. "You're working too hard," he said, though the pride in his eyes betrayed his words. "You have a board of directors for a reason, Lil." "I like the work," she replied, taking a sip. "It keeps the ghosts away." Ethan leaned against the railing beside her, looking out at the skyline. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. "This came to the legal department this morning, from the state penitentiary." Lily's hand tightened slightly around her coffee cup. "From him?" "No," Ethan shook his head. "From the warden. Apparently, inmate 894, Scott, attempted to file for an early appeal based on insufficient legal counsel. He's still trying to sell the idea that he was a victim of a corporate conspiracy." "And?" "Denied with prejudice," Ethan said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. The judge cited the overwhelming evidence. "He's serving the full 15 years, Lily. Not a day less." Lily stared at the grey horizon. She tried to summon the anger that had fueled her through the divorce, the fire that had burned in the boardroom, but she found only ash. The hate was gone, replaced by a profound, distant pity. Does he ask about me?" she asked quietly. "In the beginning, the letters were constant," Ethan admitted. "Begging for money, for a better lawyer. He tried to gaslight you from a jail cell, saying he did it all for us. Now, the letters have stopped. I heard he tells the other inmates he used to run this city. They call him the CEO. It's a joke to them." Lily took a deep breath of the crisp, cold air. It filled her lungs, sharp and clean. "You know," she said softly, "when he left me in that room, I prayed to die. I thought my value was 0. I thought I was exactly what he said, a bad investment." Ethan put a protective arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You were never a bad investment, Lily. You were just in the wrong portfolio." Lily laughed, a genuine bright sound that seemed to scatter the gloom of the winter day. "He didn't end my life, Ethan. He saved it. If he hadn't left me, I would have stayed small. I would have stayed blind. He cleared the space for the life I was actually meant to live." She turned away from the railing, turning her back on the city, on the past, and on the man rotting in a 6x8 concrete cell. "Come on," she said, opening the door back to the warmth of the hospital. "We have a strategy meeting. I want to expand the pediatric cardiology unit. It's going to cost you a fortune." Ethan laughed, a deep, booming sound. I expect nothing less. After all, it's the only ROI that matters. They walked back inside together, the heavy glass doors sliding shut behind them, sealing out the cold and leaving the winter to those who had chosen to live in it. What did you think of Lily's journey? Did Scott deserve an even harsher punishment? Or is 15 years of knowing exactly what he threw away the ultimate torture? This story reminds us that sometimes being discarded by the wrong person is the only way to be found by the right ones. If you were in Lily's shoes, would you have ever opened those letters from prison? Or would you have let the past stay buried? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this tale of karma and resilience, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of justice served.